Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Dana McCumber. I'm with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey's Office of Sustainability. This is the 5th annual Climate Week New York City event hosted by the Port Authority. And after 2 years of virtual events, I'm very excited to be back in person this year. Also very pleased to have United Airlines as our sponsor and partner again this year. The topic for today, commercializing decarbonization solutions in heavy transportation, was conceived in alignment with this year's Earth Day theme, Invest in Our Planet. Today we will hear from 2 impressive speaker panels tackling head-on the challenge to decarbonize the aviation and shipping sectors from 2 different perspectives. First, we will hear from some of the leading companies in these sectors who are directly investing in solutions that will not only achieve their climate goals, but will accelerate decarbonization across the aviation and shipping industries. During the second panel, we will hear from some of the innovative companies offering solutions to decarbonize heavy transportation and how they are working to commercialize and scale their products globally. But first, to kick it off and convey the Port Authority's commitment to sustainability, I'm pleased to introduce Derek Utter, the Port Authority's Chief Development Officer. In this role, which he has held for the past 5 years, Derek provides leadership and oversight in the development of the agency's key capital projects, including a record $30 billion public and private investment to modernize the region's 3 main airports. He also oversees several strategic groups within the Port Authority, including sustainability. Prior to joining the Port Authority, Derek was the Director of Finance and Restructuring in the office of Governor Andrew Cuomo, where he led teams to advance high-priority infrastructure projects, including the Moynihan Train Hall, the Long Island Railroad expansion, and the expansion of the Javits Center. Please join me in welcoming Derek Utter.
All right, thank you, Dana. Okay, let me just get situated here. So thank you, Dana, for that kind introduction. For those of you who don't know, I'm standing in for Rick Cotton today, our executive director, who unfortunately tested positive over the weekend. So he sends his regrets that he wasn't able to join today. Rick and I have worked very closely together in this initiative, and so easy topic for me to pick up and carry for him. I want to thank you for joining today. I also want to thank United Airlines for supporting this event and the many partners that are here today. We do view this as a partnership. The Port Authority really is at the center of a lot of very fascinating companies who I know are recognized here today. And we think of sustainability very much as a partnership. So I'm going to cover 3 topics here today. Give a little bit of an overview on the Port Authority for those who don't know. For those who do, I'll try to go quickly. I want to talk a little about our net zero commitment. And then lastly, I'll go into a bit of our specific sustainability agenda. What does it mean to have a net zero commitment, and what are we doing? So just a quick history lesson. The Port Authority was founded about 100 years ago, 1921. We were a bi-state entity. We were founded around the idea that we needed to manage the seaports, which bordered the 2 states. We collect no tax revenue, and we get user charges, user fees, tolls, rents, and that funds the entirety of our operations, including our investments, which you'll hear more about. We grew to include the New York, New Jersey river crossings, tunnels and bridges in the 1920s and 1930s. And in the late 1940s, the Port Authority took over management of the region's airports. And at the time, the airports were failing enterprises and ultimately got turned around. So today, we have 5 airports, including JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. We have 4 bridges, including the George Washington Bridge, 2 tunnels, including the Lincoln and the Holland Tunnel, 2 bus terminals, the Midtown Bus Terminal, our namesake, and I don't know if anybody knows the other bus terminal we run, the George Washington Bridge bus station. So there's a bus station just across the George Washington Bridge. The PATH, the New Jersey seaports, and the World Trade Center campus, including the Freedom Tower, which we own. So just as background for those who don't follow the Port Authority very closely, I know some of you do, but what's new at the Port Authority? We're at a moment of unprecedented investment in our airports. $30 billion plus, the largest investment anywhere in the world in airports right now. That includes $8 billion to transform LaGuardia from, we say, worst to first. $5 billion plus investment in new infrastructure at Newark. including a new flagship Terminal A, which will open later this year, and an $18 billion investment in JFK Airport with a major new terminal, which we hope to be among the top 5 rated in the world. We also have plans to start construction on a new world-class Midtown bus terminal in the coming years. We have a $2 billion restoration of the George Washington Bridge, where we're taking it apart piece by piece, building it in place. And we have a $1 billion path improvement program. So we like to brag about our new terminals. For those of you who have had a chance to visit LaGuardia Terminal B, we recently won the UNESCO's prestigious Prix Versailles Award for the best new airport in the world. That's what it looks like. And to give a shout out to our colleagues at Delta, earlier this year, the new Delta Terminal C opened to passengers, and it is equally impressive. So let's turn our hand to the topic of net zero commitment. So Rick often likes to start with this picture, and he likes to note that climate change clearly is here. The forest fires in the West, Hurricane Ida, Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Irene, all demonstrate that we need to be prepared for a future where severe weather events are more common. And they also demonstrate the urgent need to take action now to reverse and slow the effects of climate change, especially as a transportation agency. So in 2018, when the United States withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, the Port Authority became the first US transportation agency to embrace the Paris Accord standards. We committed ourselves to 35% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2035. By 2025, and we have an 80% target to reduce greenhouse gases by 2050. We laid out 12 specific initiatives to show tangible near-term progress. We call those the Clean Dozen. And last year, the Biden administration laid out a more aggressive plan to combat climate change. So, in November of 2021, the Port Authority became the first US transportation agency to embrace the Biden administration's net zero goals. So we committed, in addition to our prior commitments, to achieve 50% agency-wide reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030, so on top of our 35% reduction by 2025. And we committed to go net zero by 2050. So how are we doing this? So first of all, we're redirecting about $1 billion to low-carbon options for goods, services, and other materials. And we're adopting a second set of 12 ambitious initiatives across 3 main areas. And this is where I'll spend a little bit of time. I want to go into these 3 main areas. So the first is electrification. The second is renewable energy and sustainable fuel options. And third is sustainable buildings. Okay, so now that I've laid out the framework under which we operate, let me discuss some of the specific initiatives. So in the case of electrification, so by the year 2022, the end of this year, we will have 46 electric shuttle buses in operation. That's the largest electric shuttle bus fleet of any airport operator in the country. And we're targeting replacing 50% of our light-duty vehicle fleet by 2025 and 100% of our light-duty vehicle fleet by 2030. And we've committed to replace 50% of our medium and heavy-duty vehicles with electric vehicles by 2035. So these are things like our snow plows and trucks. In addition, the ground support equipment at our airports, so when you look out the window and you see the tugs and the baggage handling carts, we have about 6,000 or more of those across all of our airports. And we put forth a program that mandates a phase-in of all electric ground support equipment by 2030. And that's actually a very big deal. If you look at where our greenhouse gas emissions come from, one of the biggest sources is the ground support equipment at our airports. So we published a rule mandating this phase-in, and so by 2030, we expect to be well on our way. Going forward, we have a similar goal to develop an initiative at our seaports to transition to all-electric cargo handling equipment. We also have a number of initiatives around creating charging infrastructure for electric vehicles at our facilities, including the fast charging hubs at all 3 airports. Today, we have one at JFK Airport, and we're in the process of putting them in at LaGuardia and at Newark. And most importantly, of all of these initiatives is the engagement with you, our stakeholders. So many of you, airlines, shipping companies, terminal operators, rental car companies, Ubers, Lyfts, taxis, and so on, are important partners as we think about an electrification strategy. And so we will put out a Getting to Zero electrification roadmap for all of our facilities that demonstrate how we can work together. And we expect to put that out within the next year. Renewables, second area. We have a major plan to install solar across all of our facilities. So in 2018, we installed a solar system at Stewart Airport, one of our 2 smaller airports. We put in 2 rooftop systems on path buildings in 2018 and 2020. We installed a 1.4 megawatt system on the roof of the new LaGuardia Terminal B garage, which we opened just earlier this year in April. And we have a major 5 megawatt rooftop system on top of the Newark parking and rental car facility, which is expected to be completed later this year. We have a number of other projects in development. The third part of our strategy is to move our buildings to become more sustainable. So what do I mean by that? For new buildings, we put in place sustainable design requirements, like our new airport terminals. And we also use clean construction, which dramatically reduces emissions during the construction of the projects. For existing buildings, historically, we focused mostly on energy efficiency, upgrading lighting systems, building envelopes, HVAC equipment to be more energy efficient. We're also using smart building technologies. But going forward, for both, we expect the net zero strategy has to focus on using less energy, reducing and eliminating fossil fuel systems, which will become a big focus, and maximizing the use of on-site renewable sources. As an example, a showcase opportunity for us is the new bus terminal. So we would like to build the new Port Authority bus terminal as the world's most sustainable bus terminal. So today, the bus terminal is the world's largest bus terminal. But we want to turn it into a state-of-the-art facility that's also the most sustainable. So we're thinking big. We're thinking the new bus terminal will support our net zero goals by being designed for an all-electric bus fleet, also using clean construction guidelines. We will target a net zero goal, including on-site renewables and heat recovery reuse, and we'll also focus on water recovery and reuse as well. So in conclusion, everyone knows climate change is here. The Port Authority's commitment to net zero by 2050 and short-term goals by 2025 and 2030 are all part of our effort to work together with you all to reach them. Our initiatives are focused on electrification, renewables and sustainable fuel, and sustainable buildings. We want to work with you, we want your ideas, we want to be partners, and we look at you really as some of the leaders in your industries as we think about setting our own goals. And I want to thank you again for joining us today. I think this will be a great event. Every year we like to put this on, and I'll hand it back to Dana. Thanks.
Thank you, Derek. Okay, thank you, Derek. And now I am pleased to introduce Nick Depner, the Director of Greater New York Sales at United Airlines. In this role, Nick is responsible for leading corporate strategy as well as developing new business and engagement opportunities within the region. Having worked in the airline industry for over 16 years, Nick has a strong commercial background through his time spent across the pricing and revenue management, network planning, marketing, and sales organizations. Please join me in welcoming Nick Depner from United Airlines.
Thank you, Dana. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I know this is going to be a very informative and insightful session today, so very excited to hear from each of our panelists, you know, all of them who are leaders in their respective organizations. Thank you all to our speakers also for taking your time out of your schedules to be with us today. I personally am looking forward to hearing more about what each of our companies are doing in the space and how we can collectively invest more effectively and sustainably in climate solutions. This effort takes a lot of significant commitment and cooperation amongst the entire transportation industry, and each of us here sitting in this room can be an asset for one another in helping to achieve all of those beneficial results much, much more quickly. It's encouraging to see not only the companies that we work for take a more deliberate approach to help combat climate change, but also seeing the companies, the new ones, starting up with a very specific focus on climate sustainability resources. I think about some of the investments we here at United have made through our United Airlines ventures, like with Dimensional Energy, who develops sustainable aviation fuel, our $35 million funding that we just did for hydrogen electric jet engine developer ZeroAvia, and most recently with Eve Urban Air Mobility. It's going to allow us to really revolutionize the commuter experience in cities and ultimately the world by implementing electric air taxis. We've truly been putting our money where our mouth is, and our CEO, Scott Kirby, has been a leading mind and voice within the industry. His passion certainly permeates throughout our airline. And because of that, we've set an ambitious goal to be 100% green by 2050. 100% green. That means reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 100% without relying on traditional carbon offsets. We also recognize the need, though, along the way to demonstrate that progress as we get to 2050 and our ultimate goal of net zero GHG emissions. And we've established a really strong midterm goal of reducing our carbon intensity 50% by the year 2035. So progress along the way to ultimately perfection. Our strategy to become 100% green without relying on these traditional offsets is really centered around 4 key pathways: reduce, innovate, remove, and collaborate. We're going to reduce our environmental footprint with investments in sustainable aviation fuel. We're going to innovate for potentially transformative carbon reduction technology. We will remove carbon emissions in the atmosphere, another great big one, and ultimately collaborating. We're going to collaborate with our employees, our customers, airports, suppliers, cross-industry partners, and policymakers to facilitate faster action and the commercialization of technology solutions concerning climate change. And as part of our United Next initiative, you might have heard a little bit about it, we have a really unique opportunity to retire hundreds of older, smaller, more inefficient regional jets through a purchase of over 500 new narrow-body aircraft, all of the new aircraft of which have 50% lower emissions intensity than those that they replace. Specifically, the 737 MAX and our A321neo aircraft offer better overall range and environmental performance with their new, more fuel-efficient engines and improved aerodynamics thanks to lighter weight carbon composite inclusion in the airframe and construction, as well as aerodynamic innovations like natural laminar flow to reduce drag while we're flying in the air. At United, we believe in innovating not just for ourselves and for our customers, but truly in creating these innovative solutions that everyone, even our competitors and their customers, can also tap into. We're excited to have sustainability be just one more area where we're continuously pushing the boundaries and trying to make travel even better for the world. So with that, thank you and enjoy the session.
Okay, thank you, Nick. So with that, we're ready to get started on our first panel. So can I have my speakers please come up to the stage? Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, the topic for our panel discussions today builds upon this year's Earth Day theme, Invest in Our Planet. There are many ways to interpret a call to invest in our planet. However, in the aviation and shipping sectors, which present some of the biggest technical challenges for decarbonization, the need to invest in our planet can be taken quite literally. In the past decade or so, there have been enormous advancements in the fuels and technologies needed to decarbonize shipping and air travel. Today we're going to dive into not only what the most promising solutions look like, but what is being done to drive commercialization and bring them to scale. I'm very excited to have on stage with me today speakers who represent not only some of the Port Authority's key stakeholders and partners, but the companies leading the way to accelerate the commercialization of solutions necessary to decarbonize the aviation and shipping sectors. They're not just making commitments to use alternative fuels and technologies, they're directly investing in the solutions which will drive change across the industry. So I'll just introduce them quickly and then they can introduce themselves. And make sure I get these names right. So first here I have Lauren Riley, Chief Sustainability Officer from United Airlines. Andreas Mundell, Senior Vice President for Strategy and Operations at Deutsche Post DHL Group. Steve Taub, Managing Director of Investments for Jetblue Technology Ventures. Gail Grimmett, Senior Vice President for Corporate Innovation at Delta Airlines, and Lee Kinberg, Head of Environment and Sustainability for Maersk North America. So, Lauren, can I get started with you? And just a quick note, we'll save questions for the end. We'll save time, so if you can just keep questions. And after this session wraps up, we will have coffee and breakfast and some networking outside. So please, if you can wait until then. So, Lauren, I'll get started with you. United has made direct investments in solutions. Sorry, I'm going to start with a little more intro first to this question to frame for everybody. So your respective organizations have taken steps to directly invest in the decarbonization solutions your businesses need. So I'd like to hear from each of you on how your organizations are using investments to advance the technologies needed for a future of zero carbon aviation and shipping, and how you're structuring these efforts. So, Lauren, to you, United has made direct investments in solutions from sustainable aviation fuel to carbon capture to electric aircraft. Can you talk about how your investment strategy and the establishment of United Airlines Ventures feeds into your sustainability agenda?
Yeah, more than happy to. And good morning, everyone, and hello to my friends on the other side of the podium over here. So pleased to be here today. I mean, what we're really seeing is that there's an emerging nexus between discussions around technology and innovation and climate and sustainability. And this panel today is really a great example of that. I spend almost all of my time collaborating with our friends in the Ventures Fund over at United, looking at technology, market potential, emerging startups and organizations, opportunities to sort of stack technologies in a way that you didn't anticipate before so that you can drive scale. What we're laser focused on at United, and Nick did a really nice job laying out our commitment to 100% green, is really trying to find those solutions that address in-sector emissions. So to give some sort of understanding of what that means, you know, at United, in a pre-pandemic year, our emissions was about 42 million metric tons a year, so really significant emitter. And we have an obligation to address that. So when we were making our commitment to net zero by 2050, we really made a principled decision to focus on solving the problem at its core instead of offsetting it outside of our operations. So you'll find that there's varying perspectives on the role of offsets, and that's perfectly fine. But really our position came from really just truly a laser focus on the problem. So how do we find those solutions that we can both bring to market and commercialize and then scale quickly? I would suggest that today what we're seeing in the market is that we have the solutions. We actually know how to fix the problem. We just don't have the speed to build a marketplace that really doesn't exist right now for alternative fuels. So a lot of what I believe the role of venture funds and sort of investment right now is in the climate space is that acceleration. And so last year we stood up at United Airlines Ventures. It is a fund dedicated to decarbonizing aviation. So that is the core pillar of this fund. What is really interesting to me is that we did this in the middle of the pandemic when we owed a tremendous amount of money back to the government. We didn't have anyone in the skies. It was one of those moments of reckoning for aviation. And during that lowest low, we actually took a moment to reflect on what does it mean to emerge sustainably? What does it mean to emerge with an alignment to your values? And this is really where that venture fund came from. So we have a host of solutions with that, anything from alternative fuels which today can reduce emissions up to 85% on a life cycle basis, but they have potential to go even further than that. Electric, hydrogen powered, there's a whole host of solutions in that. You will find that our laser focus truly is on those emissions from flying, because 98% of our greenhouse gas inventory is from that use of fuel. So we talk about fuel all the time and everyone's like, God, all you talk about is SAF and sustainable aviation fuel. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's 98% of our greenhouse gas inventory. So if you're gonna solve the problem, if you're gonna address the elephant in the room, you can't step aside and not address that. So that's really where we're focused.
Thank you. Andreas, DHL is also is pursuing a multi-pronged approach from your commitment to invest $7.5 billion by 2030 to decarbonize your operations, to development of the electric street scooter vehicle, to the low-carbon freight solutions offered by your Go Green products. Can you describe these efforts and how they fit into a broader vision for decarbonizing your business?
Welcome and thank you for the invitation, and glad to also share our perspective on this one. So I'm overseeing a little bit what we call the clean ops activities within Deutsche Post DHL, and we just had a chat, and let me put what does DHL do, because normally you only know a very small fraction of our business. So we are one of the biggest logistics company. We do have a footprint of 39 million tons, including scope 3. The majority for us is scope 3. 2/3 is aviation. We do operate a quite extensive fleet of own aircrafts. So when we talk about decarbonization, it's all pretty much about decarbonizing fuels. The biggest is aviation. The second biggest is heavy duty road. Only then comes ocean. And we had already a net zero commitment out there for 2050 for quite a while. That did include offsetting, as you mentioned, but also we made that change to a new sustainability strategy, and we want to become truly carbon neutral. So we put out a science-based target for the year 2030 with significant reduction. And we announced by this that we are also going to invest $7 billion into the entire journey to decarbonize. We estimated roughly the pathways that are required to do so and came out with a number of $7 billion. Admittedly, this is not all investment directly into infrastructure and investment into fuel production plants. Ideally, we would procure them with long-term commitments, but when necessary, we made those choices. So at the beginning, when we started to electrify our delivery fleet, and by now we have some 24,000 electric vehicles running, we had to invent our own vehicles. So we bought a startup and we literally developed an own electric delivery vehicle for last mile delivery, and we have deployed in Europe quite an extensive number of those. Meanwhile, we sold off our company because we have developed the market. By now, the OEMs can offer us good choices, and I think that is how it should be at some point in time, that we can buy those technologies again. Right now, we are investing into electric aircrafts, not for the very long distance, obviously, but we also do have mid-range air transport, and we are jointly developing an investment directly into an electric aircraft, maiden flight about due every day now. I'm waiting for the news. It's called Alice. So also there we procured 13 and are doing joint development. And when we think about SAF, we are also very open, and we just had a discussion because procuring SAF, where there's hardly any available today, is at least a long-term commitment, which comes relatively close to an investment, but we are also considering opportunities to either jointly invest into certain facilities with other off-takers, or even with somebody who is going to produce plants, as facilities for us and a sufficient capacity.
Thank you so much. Steve, can you talk about the mission of Jetblue Technology Ventures and how you're structured and how sustainability plays into your mission and investment strategy?
Yeah, I'd be very happy to. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. I'm very pleased to be here. So Jetblue Technology Ventures is the corporate venture capital arm of JetBlue. This group was started about 6.5 years ago now, so we've been doing this for a while. Over that time, we've invested in 39 companies, soon to be 40. We also have one fund commitment that we've made as well. And you know, we're really looking to help JetBlue stay on the cutting edge of technology and innovation in travel and aviation. So that provides the company with a window on technology trends and business model trends across the whole industry. It also gives us, you know, early opportunities to establish commercial relationships with different companies, different innovators that can, you know, be implemented across the enterprise. Sustainability is one of our 5 key investment themes. So we've been doing this now for a couple of years. We have several investments in sustainability companies so we're working on sustainable aviation fuel, we're working on electric aviation. People might be familiar with Joby, which was one of our early investments actually. I think we invested in Joby in 2017. We have investments in hydrogen with Universal Hydrogen. We are looking at hybrid electric aircraft as well. And we're also looking at things like weather. We have another company called Tomorrow.io. You know, the climate is just weather integrated over time. So there's a close relationship there. We are investing in, you know, production of, we're looking at investments in production of hydrogen, carbon capture we're interested in. We're also looking at the offset value chain. I mean, I think certainly we also are looking to decarbonize our operations directly through sustainable aviation fuel, as well as things like upgrading our aircraft fleet, swapping out the old E190s for much more fuel efficient A220s, for example, as well as, you know, more behavioral things like single engine taxiing and so forth. But you know, we do think that offsetting is going to have some role, and we think that, you know, there may be some opportunities to, you know, really scale that up and make it much more credible than it maybe has been in the past. So that's something else we're looking at. So we make minority equity investments in these generally early stage companies, and we try to establish business relationships with Jetblue, as well as with others in the airline industry, and help guide the companies with their technology and with their business models.
Thank you. Gail, so from Delta, we've also seen a range of strategies from your partnership with Airbus to accelerate hydrogen-powered aviation, to the use of existing pipelines to transport SAF, to your investment in the TPG Rise Climate Fund. Can you talk about how you see these partnerships advancing decarbonization solutions for air travel, and what level of influence do you think Delta could have on TPG's investment strategy?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. A couple things. So I'll start with, and I will talk about the TPG Rise Fund, but also start with, you know, this is a big, I mean, we're a hard to decarbonize industry, right? And it's a big problem that requires bold solutions that go along with it, and it's going to take all of us. So we have a portfolio of strategies that range from short-term, mid-term, long-term, knowing that we want to control what we control today and then jump from that piece. Our involvement with TPG, the Rise Fund, is similar to some of my other colleagues who also are in the fund as well, and that is we need somebody who's going to continue to go out there and look for that new technology, because you might get mandated to do something, you might want to do something, and I'll talk about SAF in a little while about the difficulty that's there. But we need the help of others, and that's what the Rise Fund is really about, is helping us find that new technology that's out there. In the meantime, under the control what you can control, right? We have a regular carbon council that meets regularly. We will have saved 10 million gallons of fuel for the year just based on some of the changes that we're making in terms of optimizing the speed of the aircraft, taking a narrower approach when we're going in for landing, looking at how and when we're flying the planes in order to save on the fuel. And then, of course, investing in new fleet, as my colleagues are all doing, and making sure that we can upgrade the fleet so that we're getting at least 25% more fuel efficiency with the new fleet than what we have today, and we'll continue to do that. The partnerships are critical. So I'll start with that. We did invest and look at and work with to prove out that the Colonial Pipeline can deliver SAF to all of the airports on the East Coast, and that was, you know, again, we'll talk about that in a little while, but it's good to know that those types of things are in the works and existing, that once we have the product, we actually can distribute the product, which is key across the board. So I think for us, it's really taking a look at putting all of the pieces together short term and making sure that our voices are heard, whether it's via the fund or whether it's just us talking about our commitments to those items that we know are in future tech in order to get the investment, in order to help those parts of the industry or outside the industry move forward in a way that helps us, from the OEMs all the way through the think tank organizations.
Thank you. Last but not least, Lee. Maersk has a multi-pronged approach to drive decarbonization from all facets of the shipping sector, including support for research and development and the establishment of Maersk's venture arm, Maersk Growth. Can you describe how Maersk is pursuing these different strategies to decarbonize your supply chains from end to end?
First, let me thank you again for this opportunity. And do you see a common theme here? Mm-hmm. We all have really big footprints, really big shoes here. We also all have figured out that we can't just make little changes, that this is absolutely a transformation of the energy in our whole sector. And it's the whole long-distance transportation sector, not just air or just shipping, but it's the whole thing. And we've got to build a whole new supply chain for our fuels. And again, like you said, 98%, I think ours is 96%, the fuel that we burn. And we operate, Maersk is a global shipping company. We operate over 700 vessels around the world. And global shipping moves 90% of the world's long-distance cargo. And in doing so, we generate 3% of man-made carbon dioxide. The good news is that we've had some customers who are concerned about that for almost 2 decades now, and starting to get those demand signals from them saying, we've got to have ways to measure this, we've got to have ways to report it and verify it, and then, oh, by the way, you've got to reduce it. So our first investments really were in efficiency. And since 2008, we have reduced the amount of fuel it takes, and therefore the greenhouse gas footprint, to move one box of one container, which is the size of a city bus, 1 kilometer. We've reduced that by 42.6%. Now, the year before that, it was 47%, but then, of course, COVID happened, and we all had different effects from COVID, and we're all trying to deal with trying to get back to normal. But if you think about that, we've cut the amount of fuel that it took to move a certain amount of cargo by 50%. So we've already cut our carbon footprint by 50%, offset by some growth. But you can't save your way to zero. It doesn't work. Sooner or later, you've got to do something different. And for us, that means green fuels, what we call future fuels. We have had a net zero carbon shipping product for about 3 years now that has had enormous acceptance. We've got customers actually now willing to pay a premium and who are currently paying a premium to ship their cargo net carbon neutral. It's a biodiesel-based product, and it has just grown tremendously. So it's over 1% of our business now, which sounds like a little bit, but it started at 0. Again, there's only so much biodiesel available out there. So what are you going to do for the big ships, for the long hauls? You know, for our Trans-Pacific, it's 2.5 weeks between filling stations. So you've got to have something with energy density that you can carry with you. So the fuels we're going after are continuing to build that biofuel basis. We're going with green methanol, which might be either bio-based or e-based. And then longer term, out in the mid-30s, we're looking at perhaps ammonia or hydrogen. So again, common themes. Then you have to put the pieces together. How are you going to pay for all of this? Well, the nice thing about efficiency is you do get some payback. So that has been somewhat helpful. But now we are realizing that we also can't do it alone. We have to work together with industry partners. The family foundations that control the company have established Maersk Growth, which Dana mentioned, which is like a little angel investor that is investing in waste-to-energy companies with new technologies to either convert municipal waste to new fuels, to build what they call e-fuels based on renewable energy. We've got several others of those, so I won't take up a lot of time talking about those. But the key, too, is you've got to have ways of measuring this stuff. You've got to have ways of collaborating that don't violate antitrust rules and those kinds of things. But again, we've got to build an entire new supply chain. It's a total energy transformation for this long-distance industry. And what we can't do alone, hopefully we can do together.
Thank you all. So now that we've heard about a little about your strategies, I'd like to open it up to more of a discussion and talk about which technologies you feel are the most promising for achieving your climate goals. What emerging solutions are on the horizon that are the most exciting to you right now? And flip side, what do you feel are the biggest technology gaps? What do you feel you need most from the marketplace in order to fully decarbonize your business? And let's just have it a little of a discussion. Would anyone like to jump in first? Go ahead, Lauren.
Well,
sorry, maybe I should call on
I will go
everybody.
for it. So broadly speaking, for those that don't sit in the pocket of alternative fuels day in and day out like we do, there are biofuels, so bio-based feedstocks, and then there's synthetic fuels. So think about capturing CO2 out of the atmosphere and converting that into a fuel. We need all of it. I mean, we absolutely 100% need all of it. And we're seeing most of that come online. I think what you're going to see is that there's different time frames associated with the different pathways to achieve these alternative fuels. So from the biofuel space, today we use fats, oils, and greases. So think French fry oil in our planes and our ships to actually power them and reduce the emissions. That's not as sustainable necessarily because there is a limitation to that feedstock, although there are a lot of advancements in sort of growing that supply in a sustainable capacity. Then we move on to municipal solid wastes and also like woody waste. So think about agricultural slash and other that you want to get out of there so you can actually address things like forest fire, residue and or the garbage problem we have in the world. There's a lot of folks looking at those as feedstocks. I believe, and then of course alcohol to jet, I think that's actually going to play quite a significant role in the transition. My personal opinion is that the future of flying is on power to liquids, is on capturing the CO2 out of the atmosphere. We have a massive greenhouse gas problem with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This is one way to actually close that loop. So you pull it out of the atmosphere, you convert it into a fuel, you put it on your jets or your boats, it comes back out the tailpipe and you capture it back again. No net new emissions into the atmosphere. Really exciting, but the economics are terrible and it's a good decade plus off. So today, if you think about the big problems, for me, it's not the technology, it's actually two things. It's the speed, so how do we get there faster? And then it's the integrity. There's a lot of questions around, is it actually sustainable? Are you being transparent with your progress? Are you actually, do we have the policies and the accounting and all the other sort of structures in place to enable all of the different market players across the value chain to talk to one another and feel confident in the progress that we're making? Those, in my point of view, are the real challenges. We're going to see a whole host of innovation come forward, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act, credits and incentives that we're seeing coming through. I'm not worried about the technology. I think that's actually really exciting. Innovation is going to be everywhere, but it's building a marketplace with integrity and doing it quickly.
Maybe I can directly comment on this one, because that is also, when you would ask me what is most important, what is missing, yes, there are technologies missing, but there is so much power behind. And for many of the technologies, and ocean is a little bit difficult with ammonia, yes, no, don't know. But for many, the roadmap is also roughly clear, and I'm very convinced that we will make it. But what we are missing is a little bit the clarity right now in the back. And this is exactly that regulation, that accounting rules, what type of residual waste or whatever you consider to be clean, and are we willing, can we invest in something and assure that we are not accused in 2 years down the road that it was the worst thing that we could have been done, because how the hell could have you used some UCO? There is marginal fractions of palm oil into this one. We try to avoid all this, but it's so difficult if you ask people what is green, where is the balance in between land use and fuels, residual waste, or here we take waste from woody waste type of things. Where is the borderline? And we want to make everything right, but please give us some framework in the back that allows for this one. And the second biggest is this, you mentioned it in this science sentence, this framework of book and claim, I would to say. How can we forward the green attributes from us to our customers, that also our customers can participate in this journey and can also invest into this journey? So buying the green quality from us for their products. there is so much questions in there, and people say this is the worst thing that you can ever do. Others say, yeah, but if the system is right, and then there's a good registry for these type of certificates, all good. This is missing in the back, and this looks like the boring work in the back, and the innovation is more interesting, but this is really an issue if you want to do big investment and need to make decisions that will hold for a decade roughly. And so if we now make a decision on whether we go for biofuel, bio-LNG, CNG trucks, or wait 3 years and go for electric trucks, this is a significant decision. And it's so little facts that you can get around what will be certainty for my investment in the future.
Yeah, so I think the other challenge we have is scale, right? I think it's maybe it's hard to wrap your mind around the scale of particularly the fuels industry, right? So one way to think about it is that the petroleum industry is a $10 billion industry every day, $3.5 trillion a year at $100 a barrel, right? So it's just an enormous, enormous industry. Another way to think about it is, you think about companies like Exxon, Shell, BP. Each one of those companies has between 1% and 2% market share. That's how big the industry is. So if we're going to be decarbonizing aviation, right? I mean, I think in the near to medium term, there is sustainable aviation fuel is probably the only way to really do it. I mean, electrification has lots of promise, but the battery to get us to transcontinental flights doesn't exist. Personally, I think will never exist. Maybe we can electrify urban and maybe some of the regional air travel, but we're going to need sustainable aviation fuel, and we're going to need billions of gallons a year, and that means the technology has been invented. It needs to be proven out, and it needs to be scaled up. It takes a long time and a lot of money to go from bench scale to pilot scale, demonstration scale to refinery scale, and some of that money is going to come from industry. There is also definitely a role here for government. So you've already seen some sustainable aviation fuel mandates, for example, in California. I know New York is talking about establishing one. That's going to help. The other thing is we're seeing things like tax incentives in the new climate bill here in the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act, loan guarantees are going to play a big role as well. So I think all those things are going to help, but we need to be investing in large-scale infrastructure to produce these fuels so that we can actually use them at scale in our operations.
I would agree with that. I think, for us, when we think about it, we think about progress over perfection, right? We have to start now if we're going to hit the goals that we have continued to say that we all are dedicated to. When you look at SAF, to put this in perspective, we've committed to having our network at 10% SAF by 2030, right? When you look at how much SAF is out there today, if you were to look at our 2019 flight schedule, there's enough SAF for 1 day's worth of flying. That's it, right? And we've made that the commitment. All of us know that it's out there, but how we invest in making sure that we can get our partners and both the investment and the scale of it so that we can actually produce it. SAF is like a miracle. It's the only plug-and-play option that's out there right now. But the challenge is we know it's out there, we're committed to it, but now it just needs to be produced. And I think for us, when you look at that future technology, PTL, to your point, Lauren, PTL is going to be the answer. It's too far away. And that's why you have to look at, progress over perfection and what can we do now if we're making these commitments and working and making sure the right incentives are out there and the right partnerships are out there to really produce at scale what we need. The good news is there's nobody up here saying that we're not committed to it. It's really finding the power and the leverage that we have to be able to get it produced.
Again, lots of common themes. We first set a zero carbon goal for our ocean-going fleet in 2018, and that we were going to get to zero, and it is net zero, so you can use biofuels and so forth, but not offsetting. 2050 was the year that we set. Earlier this year, we accelerated that to 2040, And we broadened that commitment to be not just our ocean-going fleet, in other words, port to port. We broadened it to include the warehouses and the trucks and the trains and the aircraft and all of our operations to zero by 2040. Now, the life expectancy of one of those big ships is 20 to 25 years. So do the math. That says we've not only got to build new ships, we've got to be able to retrofit some of those younger but still very usable vessels, which means some of the plug and play has got to happen, but we've also got to have technologies to retrofit some of these things. And again, that supply chain to get the fuels produced, and you've got to look all the way well to wake. You call it well to wheel, or what do you call it in your industry? Well to wheel? Well to wake, okay. You've got to look at the energy that it takes to synthesize the fuel, to transport the fuel, to get it into the ships or the planes. You've got to look at that whole well to wake, and you've got to look at all of the greenhouse gases, not just carbon dioxide. And if you look at it on that whole holistic basis, there is a very important role for carbon accounting and standards. How do you do this? Now, for us, the International Maritime Organization, which is part of the United Nations, has actually now set metrics and goals, and we're the only, as far as I know, industry that has set global goals for the industry to decarbonize by 2050. We think they could be a little more ambitious. We'd like to see the industry moving faster on some of this, but the fact that we have global goals so that there's that level playing field. You don't have people dragging their feet and continuing at probably a lower cost using the old stuff. The whole industry has got to move forward, and not just your industry leaders.
I think it's a really interesting, how clear and consistent the message is that the challenge is not the technology, and also a testament to how much has changed over the past decade or so, but just that's not the challenge. The challenge is the commercialization, the scale, the regulatory policy support. Some of you started to allude to this a little bit, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you are looking to leverage the interest of your customers to decarbonize their operations, their supply chains, or their corporate commitments, how you're leveraging that to help to fund your decarbonization solutions.
So let me jump into this one first, since I've been last every time so far. Because those demand signals from the customers absolutely is critical for those people in the boardroom to make these kinds of courageous decisions and commitments. Without the demand signals from the customers, it would not be happening. Fortunately for us, about 2003, the Nikes and IKEAs and Starbucks and Nordstroms and some of the people who were really starting to think about what does this climate thing mean, came to us as an industry and said, we really want to develop methodologies, we want to develop verification standards, those kinds of things. DHL's been part of this too. And so we started to work together to develop those methods, and by late 2008, 2009, we actually had those methodologies in place, requiring third-party verification. So ours is done by Lloyd's Register, but others are done by some of the big accounting firms. Those pieces are so important, and those customers who were in those meetings, when people would start to drag their feet and say, oh, I have to do something different, or I don't have data systems to do that, or all of the objections, the customer would lean forward and say, but we really need you to do it. And when you've got some of your biggest customers sitting around that table with you, then you find ways to do it. Now, in the early days, there was a lot of trying to balance. You're probably not going to get to 4 decimal place accuracy on emissions factors, but you do need a way to do these calculations in a way that's practical and in a way that you can actually track progress, because that's the critical thing, is can you track your progress, not is it 4 decimal place accurate. Now, as we go forward, as you pointed out, we cannot be accused of greenwashing because that would undercut everything we're doing. So the government standards, the work by the environmental protection agencies, but also these methodologies that are being set by people like the Smart Freight Center, the World Economic Forum, and those kinds of things are absolutely critical to make this thing credible.
I would agree. In talking to our customers, I think we believe, and we know our customers believe, they shouldn't have to choose between seeing the world and saving the world, right? It shouldn't be a choice along the way. And when you talk to our customers, they say the same thing. They want to be part of the solution. They know they're going to have to report. I think transparency, all roads lead to transparency, because that really drives the partnership and the collaboration across the board in terms of that. I mean, we have corporate accounts that have already signed agreements with us to pay for some of the staff so that they can also report out that their employees are flying responsibly along the way. And I think that kind of interest will continue to be there. I think from our standpoint, though, the transparency will drive a lot of this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'll say is, our customers by and large are individuals, not corporations. We maybe do have some corporate accounts, but most of the time people are, they go on Expedia or something and they choose a flight. And unfortunately, the carbon footprint of that flight is usually not so apparent. Historically, people have said that they want green solutions, but the willingness to pay a premium for that has been limited. And I think maybe that's starting to change. But I think that this is why it's so important for everybody to work together. I think government can help with that because if we have things like fuel blending mandates, that means that everybody is kind of on an even playing field. So I think ultimately either we need to do this industry-wide, or we need people to be willing to step up and say, we're willing to pay a premium, and it could be a meaningful premium to be green.
And so I can only confirm that there is a change in behavior, and we are predominantly a B2B company, and we do see on the business side that the demand is increasing. So the other big corporates that have made their commitments are really coming and asking, can we talk about green solution? We offered first solutions with offsetting, meanwhile, truly carbon reduced solutions, and there is a lot of demand. For example, on our air freight side, we can hardly buy enough SAF, as there isn't enough SAF to fulfill all the demand that we see on the side. So this is very, very encouraging. But again, here it goes back to we do need some standards, because we need to know how do we design our product, and we are looking for certification third parties. So SGS is certifying us. So we do everything we can, but we can't guarantee our customers you are allowed to account for this one, as there is no accounting standard that would say, if we design it that way, a customer can 100% benefit from this. Currently it works, but we are very much looking for all these certainties so that we can fulfill the demand of the customers that we see in a guaranteed way, so to say.
So I'll just round it out by hitting on a couple of key points. I agree 100%. Leisure travelers aren't engaging yet. At least that's what we're seeing at United. And for a variety of reasons. I mean, we're talking about fuel, and we're talking about gases, and we're talking about long-term climate change, and sometimes that's heavy and it's depressing. And so it's just a lot. And so we're finding that our leisure travelers are just 2 steps removed, and they're glad to be so. That being said, though, they are looking for brands that are committed to changing the way that we do our business. That's really important, but their direct engagement is somewhat removed. Corporate travelers, cargo, freight forwarding, they have been some of the largest proponents of change over the last couple of years. I mean, I recall explicitly right when the pandemic hit, I had a conversation with our CFO, and I was like, we need to buy this SAF. We had the contract right in front of him, and he said, are you kidding me? You want to buy a commodity product that's 2 to 4 times the cost of conventional jet fuel, and we're in a crisis. He said, get out of here. And so from that was sort of birthed this idea of how do we sort of finance this transition so that we can send a demand signal right now and not lose momentum, because that would have been a crisis, in my opinion, But we can't do it ourselves because of this unexpected pandemic that hit us. And so we turned to our corporate travelers. And some are up here today, who helped us finance that premium to the tune of actually increasing our SAF supply use by 5 times in 1 year. And so they all stepped forward, they funded the premium with United, they got the Scope 3 reductions, and it was sort of a win-win that we can continue to send the demand signals in a time of financial crisis for us in a meaningful, value-based way for them, and it helped sort of establish a market that didn't exist. The other comment I'll just make briefly is that it will be interesting to see where this conversation is this time next year, because in addition to innovation, technology, greenhouse gas accounting, all of the other sort of standard themes that we talk about in our day-to-day jobs is this notion of ESG. And this is becoming sort of an ever more present conversation, at least in my world, and this whole issue around greenwashing and making sure that the claims we make, the commitments we make, the engagements we offer, the initiatives that we stand up, all can withstand the scrutiny of sort of yet an emerging ESG expectation, both here under the SEC and then sort of there will be some global collaboration and some of those expectations around standards and disclosures. I really do hope that that doesn't stymie any of the progress that we're seeing. I am beginning to feel that there's a bit more of a sort of hesitation, or at least a moment of pause that's occurring now, whereas before it was just go, go, go. So it'll be really interesting to see how that affects us when we have an SEC rule on climate disclosures here in the US in the coming months, and have a better understanding of what that means for our businesses.
Thank you so much. Really great comments. I think let's open it up to Q&A now. I'll see if we can do it without mics. Go ahead.
Hi, great panel.
I'm happy to take that to kick us off. We have a business resource group called Green Up. They have been probably our biggest voice even before we actually had our sustainability organization in place. They've been around for a long time now, and we collaborate with them as a group of employees. They are probably some of the ideas of what we're implementing, not necessarily on the 90% coming out of the back of the plane, but whether it's in facilities, whether we know the challenge that on our ground equipment, our employee business resource group, our Green Up, is very visible across the Delta organization and very engaged in making sure everybody knows that they have a role to play and making it visible. So it's a great point. Employee engagement, employees, investors, and customers all need to be engaged on this. And I think, I believe that we'll have, we'll be able to attract the most talented employees and be able to keep these employees with us when we do the right thing. And we see that in the engagement that we have with all of our employees.
Yeah, maybe also comment from my side, also with 600,000 employees, this is a challenge, but surprisingly, employees are eager to do something on this. So we have observed, one thing. We have announced this 7 billion. We as a company are willing to invest 7 billion. Already this announcement unleashed a potential where now people come up with ideas like, oh, I thought it needs to be a neutral business case before. Now I got the indication that it can cost something extra. And we all of a sudden have BCAs and ideas on the table that weren't on the table before. And the second is we do run already for a while, because we know how important it is to engage in a workforce of 600,000 people globally. We have something that we call the certified program. So everybody runs through very defined modules over its course, actually physical before COVID, then we changed. Very engaging, and their ESG as a total is very much embedded, so that we also can transport our values and what we understand from this one, because that is important to have also a common understanding of what is green and where we're heading.
The only other flavor to the discussion I'll add is, for us, our employees are pilots and our flight attendants and our gate agents. It's the people that our customers go to when they have questions. And if they're not saying, yes, indeed, we're committed, and yes, indeed, we believe in 100% green, and yes, indeed, we are changing the way we fly, and instead they say, I don't understand it. That's a problem. That's a big problem. So making sure that there's engagement opportunities through these employee groups, which we have as well, but then also there's this educational opportunity for them to understand, to understand the initiatives, to understand why it's important, so that they can be ambassadors of change for us. That's really important right now too.
Does anyone else want to add? Or okay, any other questions? Let's go in the back. Thanks.
Sure. So I thank you for that question. The urban air mobility market, so flying taxis, is just starting. And to me, this is really a story of where innovation is happening with sustainability from the start, which is super cool. And so you think about, driving from the airport to get here to Javits, or get from downtown Hollywood to Los Angeles Airport. If you could do that in a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that is powered by electric, so zero carbon, zero emissions, you don't have the congestion of the traffic. You don't have the emissions from the car that you're in, that you're idling in that traffic, and it's expected to be the same cost as an Uber XL. So in terms of economics, it's projected to actually be somewhere in the same range of fees. That's really exciting. And so for us, that's really about extending the customer experience and actually continuing sort of that travel journey beyond our current traditional footprint. As far as electric aircraft, I do think they're going to play a pretty significant role in our regional destinations, so commuter distances. Yes, the density of the battery is a concern of mine, the infrastructure. So what we're seeing right now, and this will be interesting to get point of view from the Port Authority, is that there's a lot of enthusiasm for these emerging technologies, but they all require their own dedicated infrastructure. And so you think about electric, or you think about hydrogen, or you think about blending tanks, even for SAF. They all require infrastructure that doesn't exist today in a finite real estate space. And so how do you prioritize, and how do you make sure you build and you can anticipate these emerging technologies? You think about eVTOL, you need a helipad. And where's that going to be? Is that going to be at the airport? Is that going to be somewhere else? So all of these things are discussions that we're working through right now on a day-to-day basis as we look at these new technologies.
I wouldn't add much else to that except to say, to your last point, it's one thing when the product is there and we need future. We spend a lot of time talking about future air mobility and what does that look like, and how will it look like. But at some point, that vision of what we think might be there, we then have to work with the ports and with the city, right, to be able to bring these forward. So I think when we talk about being able to collaborate, it has to be across the board, because you can have all the eVTOLs that you want or all the electric planes that you want, but if we can't find a place where they can land, if we can't find a place that there's an ability to recharge them, that's all going to have to change. And looking at the infrastructure is going to be equally as important as looking at the air mobility technology of what's being developed.
So a couple of other thoughts. So, one is that we've already got a pilot shortage. So, if we're going to have thousands and thousands of eVTOL aircraft, we need to figure out where the pilots are going to come from. So that may mean that we need to have better technology for helping to train pilots. It may mean that we can develop autonomy technology, although autonomous passenger flight is probably a long way out in my personal view. But so that's going to be a challenge. Another challenge is not only do we need charging infrastructure, but charging takes time, right? It's going to be much faster to refuel a liquid-fueled aircraft than it is to charge an electric aircraft. And so what does that mean in terms of things like time on the gate, for example? So I think the industry needs to figure that out. And the third thing I'll mention is sort of the integration into the airspace. right? So we have an air traffic control system that is great for kind of the higher altitudes, the longer distances, but the sort of the low altitude airspace is relatively unpopulated now. We don't have great visibility into what goes on there. We're going to need infrastructure to keep track of where are all these urban air mobility vehicles, and maybe where are all these delivery drones as well, and how do we make sure that we deconflict those and can operate these things safely? And so that's going to take a lot of infrastructure investment, in my view. And there's some interesting technology there that might play in.
And you just maybe think about this too. Also educating the communities, right? Because the perception of low-flying aircraft and perception of what's coming forward, being able to engage the community so that there's an understanding of it is also going to be key across the board.
I'll start. So there's climate tech, and then there's sort of ESG funds. I'm going to park the ESG thing because it's such a nightmare right now, in my opinion. But let's talk about sort of scale. How do we drive scale? So there seems to be sort of this divergent point of view, or sort of this sort of healthy friction that's evolving, where we need more production quickly, and it's all about de-risking the investment, getting that the financial backing to enable sort of the shovels in the ground, moving across that value chain. And Jetblue can speak to this probably better than I can, for sure. But what we're hearing is that the banks want a long-term demand signal from customers. So 10 years, can you give us a demand signal for 10 years that you'll buy the fuel at a set price, at a set quantity, with some parameters? And the answer is no. I mean, everyone I've talked to has said no. And so we need to start creative solutioning on how do we send the right demand signals to Wall Street that this is not too risky, that it's backed by companies like Delta and United and JetBlue and others, without requiring this 10-year commitment that's just not going to happen. And so finding opportunities for us to sort of bridge that discussion right now is exactly where we are. And I think, Adam, you know this better than anybody. And we need to overcome it. I think the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the incentives there, the role of the loan program at DOE is going to play a big role. So there's these new resources that are starting to come online that are beginning to sort of look at this valley of death. But until we address these valleys of death through the sort of the production life cycle, we're not going to see anything come faster. It's just going to take longer, quite frankly, and that is very problematic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'll add to that is, I think there's a lot of interest in the corporate finance angle of, there's a lot of companies out there that have been started. Some of them have raised quite a bit of money. Eventually, those companies are going to want to go public and have permanent capital. So there's certainly a lot of interest from Wall Street in helping them do that. The asset finance side of things is harder, right? I mean, I used to be in the project finance business. We looked for long-term contracted cash flows with, creditworthy counterparties, and fixed pricing, fixed volumes. That's very difficult to come by, at least in the fuels industry. The airline industry is notoriously cyclical. I think most airlines have been through bankruptcy at least once, if not twice, in the last 20 years. So that makes it very hard to, for people to rely on those offtake agreements. There's maybe with e-fuels you can have a fixed input cost structure, but for biofuels or waste fuels, that's very difficult. The suppliers of the inputs, whether that's agricultural commodities or waste biomass, generally aren't creditworthy either. Municipal waste might be an exception to that, because there you're talking about big municipalities, generally speaking, that have a pretty assured supply of waste. And then of course, on the offtake side, it's very hard to find long-term fixed price contracts. Nobody buys long-term fixed price jet fuel today, pretty much. Obviously, Delta bought a refinery as a way to try to mitigate some of that fuel price risk. I'm not sure how that's gone, but it's a tough thing to do, right? It's a lot of money at stake. So this is going to be a big challenge for sure. But we are doing what we can. And so, I know my colleagues in our sustainability group are talking with, innovative producers to sign, offtake agreements for sustainable aviation fuels, even though, some of those producers won't have anything to supply to them for several years.
Perhaps I could just give a couple of quick examples, and I know we've got other people with questions. We have now signed offtake agreements with 6 different fuel providers, including one of the largest methanol producers in the world. So yes, we've got to be sending those demand signals as well as expecting our customers to give us the demand signals. But one other piece of good news is we recently ordered 12 16,000 TEU vessels. This is the mother vessel type that could go trans-Pacific or could go around the world. We ordered 12 of those to start delivery the first quarter of 2024. And we went out for financing for that. And we were very pleased with the receptiveness of those basically green bonds to buy these things. We could have sold several times the amount that we had available. So there is some positive news there about financing that's looking for the right de-risked, as much as you can, investments to move this thing forward.
Any more questions? Yes?
Yeah, I have one. I'm with renewable energy.
Well, I guess I don't know what Jetblue, the airline, is doing with the oil majors, but I do think that the innovative companies developing these new fuel technologies are going to be partnering with the majors to deploy them, because you're right. I mean, the Chevrons and BPs and Shells of the world, those are the companies that have the scale, the capital, and the expertise and the resources to actually scale these things up. And they have a lot of infrastructure they can plug into as well. So I think you'll see, maybe a lot of these companies will wind up, maybe they'll be acquired by some of the majors. Maybe they will partner either on a, kind of a program basis or on individual projects. And that's certainly probably one of the ways that we will scale.
Right now we're at the chicken and egg situation. Who's going to build a refinery to make green fuels if you don't know if you're going to have customers for it? But who's going to build ships or planes to use those fuels if you don't know if you're going to be able to buy them? And that's why we went ahead and made the commitment to build first one small vessel and then these 12 additional vessels. And to make it all happen, of course, there's got to be many more behind that. To start to overcome that chicken and egg situation. But absolutely, we have to be working together. The oil majors also have the existing infrastructure, some of which may be convertible, to meet these new needs. But again, what we can't do individually, hopefully we can get done together.
Yeah, maybe from our view, we do both, intentionally do both with the larger players, and we just signed that large deal with BP Neste because they currently do have the volumes. They can guarantee it short term, but they are thinking in terms of set up more traditionally, index-based pricing, you name it, while we at the same time also look at more new technology where we can have individual discussions on individual projects and come to a cost-plus discussion, which is different one. We try to balance both. It has different risk profiles and different benefits for us, but we very intentionally have set up a strategy that we want to pursue both ways.
Great, thank you. I think we're going to wrap at that. We're at time, but we will have networking after this. So if you have more questions, I hope that our panelists can stick around a bit for some discussion. Please join me in thanking our panelists.